All right, we will go ahead and get started. My name is Molly. I work here at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today for this virtual event. And this event is made possible with generous support from the Mark and Mary Goff Fiterman Lecture Fund. It's my pleasure to introduce Associate Curator of European Art, Rachel McGarry.
Welcome, everyone. It is a great pleasure to see so many people coming into this virtual talk today. And I get to introduce our eminent speaker, Yehudit Shendar, who is Chief Curator of the United Kingdom Holocaust Memorial in London. Yehudit is a major thinker in the field of Holocaust studies, Holocaust museums, and memorials. She served for many years at Yad Vashem, the National Holocaust Remembrance Authority, in Jerusalem, both as senior art curator and deputy director of the museum divisions. And at Yad Vashem, she organized numerous exhibitions and permanent collection displays on Holocaust art, with shows by such artists as Samuel Bach, Bruno Schultz, Gela Scheckstein, Ludwig Meidner, and among many others. And she's written extensively on these subjects in countless exhibition catalogs and books and museum contexts. And she's a prevalent speaker across the world, I can say, in Europe, America, Israel. And she's speaking to us from Israel today. She's a rare art historian and museum professional in that she has an IMDb profile, which is unusual. I certainly don't. This is for her work on some beautiful documentaries. I highly recommend Chasing Portraits from 2018, in which she plays a part. It's a documentary about the painter Moshe Reinecke, who was murdered by the Nazis in Poland in the Holocaust. And she also worked on the exquisite documentary, The Last Flight of Peter Gintz in 2012. So in addition to all her scholarship, museum work, documentary work, Yehudit has organized about the Holocaust and Holocaust art. Yehudit has organized a number of shows and written about contemporary artists examining the Holocaust, which is like Mauricio Lasansky's Nazi drawings exhibition, which is now on view at the Minneapolis Institute of Art in the Envisioning Evil exhibition through next June. Many of you may be familiar with her 2000 book and exhibition at the Minnesota Museum of Art, Witness and Legacy, Contemporary Art About the Holocaust, in which Yehudit contributed along with Steve Feinstein and Matthew Beigel, which is really a groundbreaking study. And Minneapolis is proud to actually claim a little piece of Yehudit as she began her illustrious museum career right at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, working with Sam Sachs on the very popular Fakes and Forgeries exhibition, and then also Evan Maurer on the Jean-Léon Gérôme exhibition. So I met Yehudit in 2017 when she was invited to Minneapolis to give a series of lectures at the University of Minnesota's Center of Holocaust and Genocide Studies. And I was just beginning to work on the Nazi drawings exhibition, and she generously assisted me in researching Lasansky's Lithuanian family heritage in the Holocaust in the Yad Vashem archives. And in Vilna, Lasansky's father's hometown, an estimated unimaginable 70 to 100,000 Jews were murdered, mostly in mass shootings in the Pornery forest outside of the city. And in his mother's hometown of Kaunas, some 30,000 Jews were murdered. And Yad Vashem's central database of Shoah victims' names lists many likely family members, which we found out of Mauricio's, among the dead, with surnames of Khan and Kagan from Kaunas, and Lushansky, Mikolovsky, and Milakowski from Vilna. And we know Lasansky was very interested in this history because he tried to search for it at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum when he visited in the 90s. And it's extraordinary the work that Yad Vashem has done in recovering and preserving the names of the individuals who perished in the Holocaust, who the Nazis tried to erase. And this incredibly valuable database has recovered some 4.5 million of the identities of the 6 million Jews murdered. So thank you, Yehudit, for illuminating that aspect of Lasansky's history. It was really valuable to us and to his family. Yehudit will speak today about art and the Holocaust in her talk that's entitled The Holocaust, A Perspective of an Art Curator. Yehudit, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a great honor and pleasure to speak at the MIA. It's the cradle of my museum career, so I'll never forget my first steps up the stairs and meeting Sam Sachs and Evan Maurer, and who later became a very close friend of mine, but I was a graduate student. Evan just finished his PhD, so my first steps with the museum world were right at the MIA, and I'll be grateful forever for what I've learned from these two people and carry it with me. And I know amongst the listeners today, a friend of mine from Minneapolis. It was my hometown for 16 years. So I'm almost feeling like home, although at the moment I'm speaking from Jaffa, Israel. And I have to say that I had another talk altogether in my mind until Rachel has forwarded to me the drawings of Lasansky. Some of them I knew well because they were in the exhibit that Stephen Feinstein and myself organized, but I didn't remember how powerful they are. And once I've seen them again, I said, I know what I want to speak about. I can speak about the Holocaust and Holocaust museums probably for another 4 hours. But we have an opportunity to see an artist who has confronted the subject of Holocaust, not because he saw it, not because he witnessed it, not because he experienced it, but I would say he felt it with his heart. And he became enraged at what he learned, understanding that family members of his stayed behind, and it's not just the story of his people, but it's story of his family. And so when I said yes to this lecture, and that was Rachel ages ago, I only realized last month, and can we have the first slide, please? Here we are. So instead of a perspective from Jerusalem, I changed the name to a perspective of an art curator, because I do believe that many historians and scholars forget that art is one of many ways to study and understand the Holocaust. I would rather say it's probably a very powerful one. And I know that it speaks a universal language. And this universal language is one that art can deliver what words are not able to do. Next one, please. So today is the 10th of November. In 1938, between November 9th and 10th, a raging event happened in Germany. In Holocaust annals, many times it's called Kristallnacht, which is a German word, but actually it should be named the November pogrom, because at that night, over 300 synagogues burned, Jews' businesses were ransacked, 90,000 Jews were put into camps in Buchenwald, Sachsenhausen, and about 90 Jews were murdered. The very important Holocaust historian by the name of Martin Gilbert has said that this was the beginning of the end. It was the moment the Jews understood that Germany is not a country anymore, and the world realized the calamity and has organized some sort of immigration policies. This is not time to speak about it, but it's a day to be remembered. This is actually the pivotal point after which we can already see and understand what is going to come in the following years. Kristallnacht, November 10th, 1938. The next one, please. Before we start, I would like to say a word about art and poetry. And the reason I'm saying it, because there's a very famous German Jewish philosopher, sociologist, who said a very riveting sentence. And the riveting sentence was, after Auschwitz, to write a poem is barbaric. This is a harsh sentence. And he was quoted, or rather misquoted many times as saying, no art after Auschwitz. What Adorno, Theodor Adorno, wanted to say is that it was such a catatonic event that writing about it with poetic words or painting it is an impossibility. What they didn't know at the time is that good poets and good artists actually can confront it. So in my lecture today, I would like to show the art of Mauricio Lasansky, together with poets that were writing about it during the time of the Holocaust and after the Holocaust. Their powerful words are still resonating with us. But how come Lasansky, an Argentinian, moving to the United States in the middle of the war years, very interestingly so, 1943, he arrives in New York and later on takes residency in Ohio. So now he is in 61 seeing on American TV the procedures of the Eichmann trial, who was caught in Argentina. So now you can understand the first connection, that in Argentina resided refugees from pogroms in Eastern Europe, as well as Jews who fled from Germany immediately after Kristallnacht. But at the same time, Argentina was hosting Nazi officials who fled from Germany and hid in Argentina, just like Eichmann. In 1961, the Israeli security forces locate him, bring him to Jerusalem, and the state of Israel puts Eichmann on trial for the atrocities and crimes he has acted during the Holocaust. I was in high school, and the words I'm going to read you still resonate in my ears, because in our classroom, there were the small transistors radio. It was put on the table, and all of us were listening carefully. It's Gideon Hausner, who was the chief prosecutor of the state of Israel against Adolf Eichmann. When I stand before you here, judges of Israel, to lead the prosecution of Adolf Eichmann, I'm not standing alone. With me are 6 million accusers, but they cannot rise to their feet and point accusing fingers towards him who sits in the dock and cry, I accuse. For their ashes are piled up on the hills of Auschwitz and the fields of Treblinka, and strewn in the forest of Poland. Their graves are scattered throughout the length and breadth of Europe. Their blood cries out, but their voice is not heard. Therefore, I will be their spokesman, and in their name, I will unfold the terrible indictment. So with these words, the process has started, and Lasansky was listening to these testimonies, and they stirred something within him. And in 1966, the 33 drawings called the Nazi drawings were ready, and later on displayed for the first time in New York at the Guggenheim Museum. May I see the next slide, please? When you enter the exhibition, which Rachel McGarry has curated so nicely. The first images you see are the images of the perpetrators. And the perpetrators usually are not spoken about, but they need to be looked in the eyes, and we all need to realize they were real people with real names. One of them was Adolf Eichmann. So let's look at that person and the image that Lasansky so powerful has drawn for us, where his jaw and his teeth are not at the regular place. They're up on his forehead. How did he come up with this? Let's see. Next one, please. We all know Lenny Cone, the neighbor from Canada, not with us anymore. He, like Lasansky, a Jewish singer and poet, could not remain without words. And this is what he said. All there is to know about Adolf Eichmann: eyes, medium; hair, medium; weight, medium; height, medium; distinguishing features, none; number of fingers, 10; number of toes, 10; intelligence, medium. What did you expect? Talents, oversized incisors, green saliva, madness? Yes, when we look at Eichmann here, he's just sort of a middle-aged man looking quote unquote normal, because they were ordinary people, real people, not from another planet. They were European cultured personalities turned into murderers. Next one, please. So here we can look at the photograph of Adolf Eichmann, not during his trial, but rather at the height of his career as an SS officer, not such a high one. And if you look closely at the hat he is wearing, right in the middle, there's a skull. Now look again at how Lasansky has formed the image of that perpetrator, and you can see where he got the idea that the teeth are on the forehead, because that's what they wore. It's the skull at the front of a hat. Can you think about this as a sign of the unit you are part of is the skull? A different poem was written by an Israeli poet by the name of Dan Pagis. Dan Pagis himself was born in Radautz, which is a small city in Romania. He was born in 1930, so you can understand in the 40s he was a young adult. He was able to flee. His father and mother were not. And he eventually emigrated to Israel, where he became a professor of literature and poetry at Hebrew University. Now let's hear what does someone say about the perpetrator who has actually seen them. No, they definitely were human beings. Uniforms, boots, how to explain? They were created in the image. I was a shade. A different creator made me. And he, in his mercy, left nothing of me that would die. And I fled to him, rose weightless, blue, forgiving. I would even say apologizing. Smoke to omnipotent smoke, with outrage or likeness. What does this poem do? Dan Pagis is actually having a conversation with the creator and doesn't understand why the creator gives the oppressor, the right to live, while he, the member of the Jewish people, the beloved people of Israel, is turning into smoke, the one which has no image and shouldn't look like the creator. The question of where was God? Where was he to protect his people is a question that is being asked by many survivors. But Dan Pagis mainly wants to say, you saved them. But this is not the truth. As we know, at the end of the Eichmann trial, Eichmann was sentenced and executed, the only execution ever by the Israeli government, and his ashes were spread over the Mediterranean Sea, far away from the territorial borders of Israel. The next one, please. Children. I think this is the second part of the exhibit, an entire wall which Rachel has covered with these really difficult to watch images of children. I think we all can understand that adults are taking part in wars, and during wars, soldiers die and also civilians. But what's so special about the children, and it's so interesting that Lasansky understood it and puts these faces in front of us to think about children, victims that have been murdered. Next one, please. In order to understand the plight of children, I would like to tell you one story of one child. And it's a little boy by the name of Richard. He was born in Paris in 1940 to his mother and father, who were immigrants from Poland to Paris. Like many others, Paris at that time, between the two world wars, was home to many Jews who find work and art and culture in this European city. But in 1942, at the height of the roundups, the mother and the little child, Richard, was sent to quite an unknown camp by the name of Pithiviers. And I need to stress the fact that, yes, France had concentration camps and France had transition camps. And from these concentration camps, transition camps, Jews were sent to Drancy. And from Drancy, there were only two addresses. One was Auschwitz, and one was to the Ukraine. And most of those who were sent on these transport did not survive. But here's the story. So we have the mother. It is Esther Oranchik Frankel. She is being sent to Pithiviers, and upon arrival, she is separated from her child. And after a while, she is sent alone on a train while Richard is left in the camp. His father is in another camp, and the story is that each one of them, father, mother, and child, arrive in Auschwitz separately. They weren't even given the chance to hug each other at the last moments of their lives. And while she's on the train, she drops a little postcard, which was found by locals and eventually reached Yad Vashem. I would like to read it to you. Next one, please. Friday, August 7th, it's 1942. My dear family, I'm on the train. I do not know what has become of my Richard. He's still in PTVA. Save my child, my innocent baby. He must be crying horribly. Our suffering is nothing. Save my Richard, my little darling. I can't write. My heart, Richard, my soul are far away, and no one is protecting my little 2-year-old boy to die quickly. Oh, my child, give me my Richard. So when Lasansky paints these, or rather draws these images, this is the real story. Little children being murdered. Can I have the next one, please? I'm quoting here a poem written in 1942 in Palestine, before the establishment of the State of Israel. Natan Alterman was the poetic voice of the new settlers who came to Palestine before the establishment of the state. And many times it has been written that the Yishuv, these people, did not care about what happens in Europe, which is totally untrue. There was great concern, and Ben-Gurion, who was the leader, attempted to assist, but as we say, it was beyond their capacity under the British mandate of the time. The name of his poem is Of All the People. The listeners who are Jewish probably recognize these words. Ve'otanu bacharta mikol am, and you have called us from all the peoples. We are saying it in the prayer many times. And again, Natan Alterman has an issue with the prayer and with God. If you have called upon us, you should have been there to protect us all, but mainly those innocent kids. And here is what he writes. When under the gallows, our children cried, we did not hear the world's wrath. For of all the people, you selected us. For us, you loved and sanctified. For you selected us of all the people, those of France, Japan, and Norway. And when our children marched to the gallows, smart Jewish kids, they all know that their blood does not count. No one there to protect, no one to cry. Yes, Jewish children were murdered, and most of the world stood quiet. Next one, please. I'm continuing with the same poem. Great is the worthy about sculpture and paintings, lest those our treasures are destroyed in a raid. But the heads of infants, our treasures they are smashed to the walls and crushed on the roads. Their eyes are begging, Mom, don't look, and don't see us, lying in the long rows on the ground. We are famous old soldiers, only short in size, aren't we? And we are looking at the drawings by Lasansky. We have some feeling that these children are old. They don't look like sweet, cute children. And that's what Natan Alterman says. We are famous old soldiers, the soldiers of attrition, of years, millennia of persecution, of Jewish children who didn't count. Now I know that Lasansky didn't read Alterman, and Alterman didn't know Lasansky's drawings, but there was a historical event that both of them are connected to and are reflecting as artists with words or with a pencil. Next one, please. Many times we ask, so what is so unique about the Holocaust? Why are the Jewish people continuously confronting, remembering this event? There were other atrocities in the world. There were other genocides before and post-Holocaust. But what I want to say is that rarely in any conflict were kids targeted. Children were targeted, and now you can hear why. It's the testimony of SS General Otto Ohlendorf, Einsatzgruppe D. These were the elite units of the German Wehrmacht, the Einsatzgruppen, sent to the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union territory. There were 4 of these storming forces, and they had one task. After the Wehrmacht has conquered an area, the Einsatzgruppen coming behind, taking all the Jews of every single village and city and murdering them by shooting them single one by one. I think this is part of the Holocaust which is not remembered enough. Around 2 million Jews were shot to death one by one, not gassed in chambers. Rather, someone was holding a pistol or a rifle and shooting at their back after they were asked to undress and after they were asked to dig their own graves. Ohlendorf, who was an economist and had a PhD, not the riffraff we can think of, rather an educated man, was called to court on the tribunal in 1946, the Nuremberg trials. And here is what he's being asked by the Russian prosecutor, General Nikitchenko. And in what category did you consider the children? For what reason were the children massacred? And Ohlendorf answers, the order was that the Jewish population should be totally exterminated, including the children? Yes. Were all the Jewish children murdered? Yes. Next one, please. About 1.5 million Jewish kids were murdered. And as such, Yad Vashem has created a special hall of remembrance for them. And we're going to watch it in a moment, but before that, I want to tell you about a meeting I had with Susan Rice, who at the time was the representative of the US in the UN. And she came to a visit at Yad Vashem, and I walked with her through the exhibit. And at the end of our Museum of the History of the Holocaust, we entered the Hall of Remembrance to the Children. And as you can see, Susan really couldn't bear the thought of the children. And she hugged me and she cried, because I think we females know what it means to bear a child, to rear a child, and what it means when a child is taken away. You're on a train and your 2-year-old is left behind only to be murdered about a month later in the same cave in Auschwitz. Can we please go to the link?
The concept of a single candle that reflected into infinity, which you experienced in infinite space.
Immanuel Diakovetsky, 5 years old, Ukraine. Paula Kolin, 12 years old, Poland.
Hanna Rivka Yosefovich, 5 years old, Hungary.
Ginette Allman, 6 years old, France.
Svetlana Mishlimovich, 3 years old, Russia.
We walked through the reflecting candles into infinity, and then emerged out into daylight, into life, into the view of the skyline of Jerusalem.
I think this is a riveting space which Moshe Safdie has created for Yad Vashem, and it highlights what happened to children during the Holocaust. Can I have the next slide, please? We already had an issue with God. Was he there or wasn't there? And the next issue we're having is with the Christian world. And at the head of the Catholic Christian world stood a man, Pius XII. And he never came out saying loud and clear for his followers, for Catholics throughout Europe, to do something about what's happening to their Jewish neighbors, friends, teachers, lawyers, farmers. And Nathan Alterman continues to say, the iron devoured day and night. And the Holy Christian Father in the city of Rome did not come out with the icons of Christ to stand one day in a pogrom, to stand one day, one single day, where for years, like a lamb, a small, unknown Jewish child stood alone. I need to say a word about the Christian world, that yes, the Pope Pius XII did not come out. A while ago, meaning years, about 5 years ago, an emissary came to Yad Vashem and asked to change the writings, accusing Pius XII for not coming out loud and saying what he should have. And they said this needs to be changed because it did a lot of good deeds, but quietly. And Yad Vashem and other scholars begged the Vatican to open its archives. The current Pope did succumb and opened the archives shortly until COVID-19 changed the route of research. But all of those who studied the papers said the Pope knew very well what's happening to the Jewish people, and he has done nothing. So until now, no proof that he was actually trying to protect Jews. However, there were many Christians throughout Europe that saved children and adults under the wings of the cross. These were personal initiatives, and they should be remembered. The next one, please. On the left, you can see a drawing by Lasansky, where you have, as it's part of the Nazi drawings, we understand that the person who hangs from the cross is a crucified Jew. He's not the first one to do that. In the middle, we have a drawing, or rather painting, by Marc Chagall. It is called The Yellow Crucifixion. If you look very close, the crucified person is not Jesus, or it is a Jew like Jesus was. He's wearing the talit. And if you look around him, all the calamities of the Holocaust can be detected: burning houses, fleeing Jews. 1942, this was painted while Chagall was in the US. He was lucky to be taken to the US by the only American righteous who has taken about 3,000 cultural figures he met before in Germany and made the effort to bring them from Europe to the US. On the right side, it's a woodcut by an Israeli artist by the name of Moshe Hoffman, himself a Hungarian who survived the Holocaust as a young person, immigrated to Israel, and worked as a conservator in the archaeology department of the state. And you can see what is happening. It's almost, he had quite a dry Hungarian humor. And you have the Nazi perpetrator holding the hands of the crucified Jesus and taking him with him. Because according to the Nuremberg laws, Jesus was a full Jew. His mother and father were Jewish. So the question as to why Christianity was silent, I think, is a major question to be asked and pondered. And there is this quite interesting sentence written by Israel Zangwill, who was an author, a poet, and a friend of Theodor Herzl, who were the ones to think about the creation of a state for the Jews because Europe was not able to treat them as equals. And what he wrote was, the Jews are not only Jesus's people, as he was born a Jew, moreover, they are the Jesus of the peoples, meaning the one who is constantly being crucified on several crosses for several reasons. And the more you will read this sentence, the more you will understand that there is merit to it. And there's someone who knows how to use words. The next one, please. I think many of you looking at these drawings in the exhibitions feels appalled. They look gruesome, they're hard to watch. It's like we're entering a world that should not be seen by human beings. It is inhumane to show the human body in such disregard. Where did Lasansky get it? Why is he doing it for us? So let's look at the next slide, please. Bergen-Belsen was the first camp that the British forces liberated 14th of April, 1945. Only about 2 weeks before the American forces have liberated Buchenwald. But Buchenwald and Bergen-Belsen were not the same. As you know, I'm working currently as the chief curator of the Envisioning UKHM, United Kingdom Holocaust Museum. And while researching, I came upon this unbelievable testimony by a BBC reporter, Richard Dimbleby, entering with the British forces the camp of Bergen-Belsen. Please listen to his words.
I have just returned from the Belsen concentration camp, where for 2 hours I drove slowly about the place in a jeep with the chief doctor of 2nd Army. I had waited a day before going to the camp so that I could be absolutely sure of the facts now available. I find it hard to describe adequately the horrible things that I've seen and heard, but here, unadorned, are the facts. There are 40,000 men, women, and children in the camp. German and half a dozen other nationalities, thousands of them Jews. Of this total of 40,000, 4,250 are acutely ill or dying of virulent disease. Typhus, typhoid, diphtheria, dysentery, pneumonia, and childbirth fever are rife. 25,600, 3/4 of them women, are either ill from lack of food or are actually dying of starvation. In the last few months alone, 30,000 prisoners have been killed off or allowed to die. Those are the simple, horrible facts of Belsen. But horrible as they are, they can convey little or nothing in themselves. I wish with all my heart that everyone fighting in this war, and above all those whose duty it is to direct the war from Britain and America, could have come with me through the barbed wire fence that leads to the inner compound of the camp. Outside, it had been the lucky prisoners, the men and women who had only just arrived at Belsen before we captured it. But beyond the barrier was a whirling cloud of dust, the dust of thousands of slowly moving people, laden in itself with the deadly typhus germ. And with the dust was a smell sickly and thick, the smell of death and decay, of corruption and filth. I passed through the barrier and found myself in the world of a nightmare. Dead bodies, some of them in decay, lay strewn about the road and along the rutted tracks. On each side of the road were brown wooden huts. There were faces at the windows, the bony, emaciated faces of starving women too weak to come outside, propping themselves against the glass to see the daylight before they died. And they were dying every hour and every minute.
Thank you. I think that after hearing the voice of Richard Dimbleby in the very sort of laconic manner of BBC reporting, I think we will look differently now at the drawings of Lasansky, and then we'll need no more explanation. Next 3 ones, please. Next one. The next one. He was not there, but I'm sure that Lasansky saw those photographs which were disseminated worldwide and definitely became incised in the public mind, first in Britain, but then all over the world, and became part of our communal memory as to what was the Holocaust about. Next one, please. And the next one. So what does one say about it? I don't think we have the right words. And I'm turning again to a very beloved poet, a Romanian who came from Transylvania, where German was a major language. He comes from Chernovich. And although he spoke 8 languages, he only wrote in German, even after the war, losing his parents and surviving the Ukrainian territories conquered by the Germans and living in Paris, but unable to live and forget about the Holocaust. He committed suicide in the River Seine in Paris. But here is what he wrote. Death fugue, Todesfugue. Black milk of dawn, we drink you at night. We drink you at noon, death is a master from Deutschland. We drink you evenings and mornings, we drink and drink. Death is a master from Deutschland. His eye is blue. He strikes you with lead bullets. His aim is true. A man lives in the house, your golden hair, Margarete. He sets his dogs on us. He gives us graves in the air. He plays with the snakes and dreams death is a master from Deutschland. Your golden hair, Margarete. Your ash hair, Shulamit. Next one, please. I will read this. There was a Russian poet by the name of Yevgeny Yevtushenko. The biggest massacre, one of the big massacres of the Holocaust, happened in the city of Ukraine, Kiev, in September of 1942. Within 2.5 days, 32,000 Jews were shot at and their bodies dropped into a raven just outside of the city of Kiev. After the war, the Russians didn't speak about the Jews. They were members of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union lost. We must face the number. 27 million of the Soviet Union were killed in war or died during the Great War. But no one spoke about the Jews. Yevgeny Yevtushenko wrote a long poem by the name of Babi Yar. And Shostakovich said, we all knew about Babi Yar, but it took Yevgeny Yevtushenko to write his words for us to stand up and cry. So this is the last stanza of his poem. The wild grasses rustle over Babi Yar. The trees look ominous like judges. Here all things scream silently, and burying my head slowly, I feel myself turning gray. And I myself am one massive soundless scream above the 1,000 buried here. I am each old man, here shot dead. I am every child here shot dead. Nothing in me shall ever forget. Now he is not a Jew. He just screamed because injustice was done, because a crime was committed. Now in the place of Babi Yar today, and this will be my closing comments of my lecture today, is to say that, yes, we do remember. And when we say we, I don't mean just the Jews, I mean the world remembers. It remembers the crime which has put in our face the fact that we all can turn into evil. It's within us. And we need to make sure that this part of us will not emerge. It is for us to remember the atrocities, not to remember the past, but rather to try and think, what can we do for the future? For similar events not to happen after the Holocaust. Some of them still did happen. Genocides occurred, and we need to be vigilant about it. Can I have the next slide, please? So the first museum I would like us to tell you about, which is currently being erected in the Raven of Babi Yar. The first part of it is what you see now. It's a huge mirror and some, I think, 24 pillows which were shot by the same kind of bullets that have murdered, as I said, 32,000 Jews within 2.5 days of murder. So there was an international tender put together by the Ukraine government. Next slide, please. And a new building which won the tender was a Viennese group by the name of Querkraft Architekten. And it's a very light building into which you arrive by walking through a path which takes you deeper and deeper down into the raven of where the Jews of Babi Yar were murdered. I need to say a word about this place because according to every testimony in history we know, the Ukrainians were part of the murdering team it was not only the Nazis. And we all hope, which is not yet the case, that the narrative that is going to tell us the story of what happened in the Ukraine is going to speak about collaborators, willing collaborators, and that historical narratives are not going to change under the current government of the Ukraine. The next museum, which is currently erected, and it's in the middle of Budapest. And can I have the next one, please? It's going to be erected in a train station in Budapest by the name of József János train station. For those who know something about the Holocaust, they probably do know about Raoul Wallenberg, because it was in this station that Raoul Wallenberg was able to save thousands of Jews. Now the Hungarians are very proud of Raoul Wallenberg because he did his act of mercy in Budapest. But we need to know the historical truth. It had nothing to do with the Hungarians under the fascist rule of Horthy, and Jews were persecuted and murdered, and the numbers are about 450,000 Jews were sent between the month of April and July 1944 to be gassed in Auschwitz, and the burners were burning day and night for months to burn the bodies of those murdered. So again, this museum has a huge controversy because again, the collaborators, fascists, are not to be mentioned in this museum. And it is the European Holocaust Education Trust. And just yesterday, they had an entire session which was dedicated to the fact that the narrative of this museum is still hidden and unknown. And the last one I'm going to speak about is the one I'm involved with in London. And the three museums, next one please. The reason I picked up these three endeavors has to do with the fact that governments, it's not the Jewish communities, it's the impetus of the government. In the UK, if everything will work well, January 27, 2025, will open the doors to this quite unusual building, which is a collaborative mode between David Adjaye, who is a Brit born in Ghana, and Ron Arad, who is an Israeli, who have designed this monument, which you walk through and then you descend down into the display area, the content of which the narrative I'm currently working on. And the story behind this monument is David Cameron in 2016 visited Berlin with his family, and his children saw for the first time the monument in Berlin. And they asked the father, how come London doesn't have one? And David asked himself, how come London doesn't have one? Because London doesn't have, until this very day, a monument to the Holocaust. So there are good reasons why no, because the Brits think it had nothing to do with them. The Holocaust happened on the continent and the island was saved. But there is a British perspective to the Holocaust. This is what we are going to show. As if someone is standing with binoculars and watching from the island, the continent, and learning what Britain has done or has not done vis-a-vis the evil which unfolded on the continent, the great democracy. Yes, it has a lot to do with immigration. Yes, it has a lot to do with the white paper and the limitations of immigration to Palestine. big questions. I have to say with quite an admiration that at the moment the British government is willing to look at history with candid eyes. This is not going to be a celebratory exhibition. It's going to be true to history. And one of my chairs said a wonderful sentence. Yes, Britain did a lot, but it didn't do enough. That's what I'm working on. So I would like to end with this last slide, because I think most of us ask ourselves, so what do we do? Now Yehudit has spoken about it. We have heard so many lectures. We know so many facts. What do we do with it? It was February 2016. I'm sorry, 2005. It was very cold at Yad Vashem. It was the opening night of our new museum. We were all tired and cold, and we just wanted the ceremony to be over. And there came Elie Wiesel. And in his speech, he absolutely captivated us. And these are the last words I would like to read, and a legacy about Elie and about what he tells us to do with what we have learned. My good friends, we never try to tell the tale to make people weep. It's too easy. We did not want pity. We decided to tell the tale. It is because we wanted the world to be a better world, just a better world, and learn and remember. There's a frightening character in all of Kafka's stories. It is always the messenger who tries to deliver the message and is unable to do so. We feel sorry for the poor messenger, but there is something more tragic than that. When the messenger has delivered the message and nothing has happened, nothing has changed. You have heard tonight those who spoke here with elegance, with compassion, and they spoke already about anti-Semitism and tolerance. Now, 60 years later, when the messenger has tried to deliver the message, why should there be anti-Semitism? But there is. Why should there be suicide killers? But there are. Why should there be hatred? But there is. Fanaticism? Yes. It's calmed? No, it's here. The messenger has delivered the message. What's our role? We must become the messengers of the messengers. Never again is what the survivors said, and it did happen again. We should be the messengers. It will not happen again in the future. Thank you for listening.
Wow, Yehudit, that was a really insightful and wonderful talk. We can't thank you enough here. And I learned a lot. You know, I spent a lot of time looking at these drawings and, 4 years studying them. And there's some things that you pick out that I think are so interesting right at the start when you said that the perpetrators are human beings, and Lasansky's making that point. And those Nazi busts that start the series, he's very carefully, even though they're all muzzled and wearing the similar skull cap, he very carefully individualized each nose, each set of ears, each eye. He wants you to know these are individuals. That was such a nice point of yours. And the emphasis on the children, those are the largest size. Those are some of the largest drawings in the series, just by scale alone. So many other things I could talk about. I'm really glad you shared that story of Richard Frankel in France being deported. That just hits home the tragedy when you think about the individuals. So we have a few minutes. Sorry for the technical difficulties that caused us to go. You were right on time. We went a little couple minutes over, but we have a few minutes. We'd love to, if you would stick around for 10 minutes just to ask. We have some questions coming through.
Definitely. Yes.
I have an interesting one here. from Jim Gambone, is a painter and public health professor who has been painting about COVID since January of 2020. I'm now trying to collect the art of COVID-19 for a virtual museum of remembrance. 5 million killed so far. I would like you to speak more about the role and responsibility of the artist today confronting a major human tragedy. And why do you think it took so long to recognize that artists can deliver through their art what data and scientific language is not able to do? I really appreciate your presentation. That's such a great question. Thank you, Jim.
Well, I will share with you the fact that when I joined the Yad Vashem team for, that's, more than 20 years ago, to start and plan what's called the New Historical Museum, and I was introduced as the art curator. Well, all the historians around me looked at our director, chair, and said, what's this art historian doing with us? Well, we are serious. We are dealing with documents and photographs and you name it. We're not dealing with art. Art is for decorative purposes. And then when we started to work on it, we had a one-liner for what is the message of the Yad Vashem Museum. And it was, we are going to tell the story from the perspective of an individual victim. So now we have to remember, all these documents were not written by Jews, were not written by the victims. The Jews were not allowed to hold the camera. So actually everything historians are looking at are the work of the perpetrator. So where is the perspective of the single Jew? And that's when I rose up and said, I have it for you, my colleagues. The Jews who were artists and lived through that period drew the victim's perspective. It's an important one, it's a different one, and it gives the total picture when we see the perpetrator's perspective meeting the victim one. This is the historical truth.
Boy, that must have been great to show that art and convince those skeptical historians. I've been convinced more and more in my research on this subject that of the important role artists, playwrights, filmmakers, poets, as you showed today, have in shining a light on injustices of the past, that things are forgotten, things that are reported in live time in the papers, people read, they might be horrified for a minute and they move on and they might not actually know all the facts yet in the live reporting. And it takes decades for some tragedies to come to light as more and more people pay attention, and artists in film and television can even have, there was a lot of complaints. Elie Wiesel said that, complained about the vulgarity and commercialism of some of the 1960s and 70s and 80s films, but boy, popular culture plays a major role in getting the world to pay attention. You can't expect every person to read tomes and tomes of volumes and volumes of historical research. So we have another very interesting question. I would love to hear your reply here, Yehudit. Who has been most involved in Britain in getting the Holocaust Memorial built? Who has been the most oppositional? Have the major political parties taken a role one way or the other?
If this is the question about Britain, then I would say it's the Conservative Party, it's not Labour, which has been in power since David Cameron. And so I can say that the Conservative government is completely behind it. Believe me, there are opponents to the project, even ones within the Jewish community. I must say that the British government is not only standing behind it. I have not mentioned that it's going to be erected just next to Westminster. What a strong statement this is that the Holocaust Memorial stands in the Garden of Westminster. This is the House of Commons. This is where decisions are made. This is where Churchill had taken his people and said we need to be part of the war against this evil. So the government is behind it, not only by words, it's supporting it by a quite sizable budget, and until now is a stronghold of remembering the Holocaust.
And one of the things you said that was really interesting to me is that it takes governments to build memorials, that governments play a major role in, from Ukraine to, you know, the United Kingdom to Israel, to the United States. Are there any examples where there are private memorials that have, I don't know, that are able to attract large attention to the Holocaust without government backing? Can you think of examples?
I would say there are local ones of Jewish communities, even in the US, but they don't attract the kind of crowds you will see as the US Holocaust Museum, which is on the main artery of all the museums in Washington. It's now almost 20 years that it was open, and you still cannot get tickets. You need to register ahead of time. I think it's an interesting phenomenon about the Holocaust. The farther we get from the event, we're talking about 8 decades and plus, the world becomes more and more interested. More research, more books, more movies, more theaters, more museums are still erected. And it's something for sociologists to look at this phenomenon, but it's definitely something to be thinking about. Yeah.
And we might have time for one more question here. I don't, as you remember from your time in Minnesota, there are a lot of Scandinavians in Minnesota, and Rasmussen has written, so that's a Danish name. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I am a Danish American and proud of the role that Denmark played in rescuing, excuse me, it's cut off here, rescuing many Jewish people. What is your opinion of the work done by the Danish people in this endeavor?
Well, anyone who has rescued Jews, we need to be more than thankful, because when we think about the Holocaust, it's a pan-European event, even more than pan-European, because it filtered down to what we call the Maghreb countries of Northern Africa. If the Allies were not victorious, all these countries, all the Jews would have been murdered. As we have seen with Ollendorf, it was total annihilation of the Jewish race globally. Anyone who stood up against the Nazi intent, we are utterly thankful. And the Danish people have done quite a wonderful rescue operation, and all those who have named righteous amongst nations are righteous, and they deserve all the attention, the thanks of the Jewish people and the world to realize that amongst evil, there are some people who retain humanity and goodness.
That's very nice. I love Hannah Arendt when she talks about the Danish efforts in her Eichmann book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, notes that from the King of Denmark down, the Danes refused to call out Jews with the yellow star, the Jewish badge, and the king said, "I'll wear one." And I think that's so interesting how that is the start of a very terrible sort of civilized end of civilized society, when you start to call out people by their race, religion, and label them. And we can see this happening with immigrants today, or well, it has been happening in the US, sort of the anti-immigrant efforts, but to stand in solidarity with a group of a minority group and not allow that kind of, because that was the thin edge of the wedge, and it goes from there, from the wearing of the yellow star to further anti-Jewish legislation.
We need to learn to accept the other, and the other can be of any form, by dress, by religion, by culture, but the other needs to be part of us. We never know when we ourselves can become the other.
That is a very poignant, wonderful place to end. Yehudit, thank you so much for being here. We've had so much interest. The questions keep coming in, but we'll have to schedule another program with you. We really wanted to bring you to Minneapolis, but COVID has prevented that, but we were able to do it virtually. And I think the whole audience in Minneapolis is so grateful to have had you here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for everyone listening and joining.